Thank you for listening to Mormon Sex Info. This episode is an archived episode and is only now becoming publicly available. Mormon Sex Info relies on contributions. To contribute, please visit mormonsex.info. And now, please enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to a co-production between Mormon Mental Health Podcast and Mormon Sex Info. This is Natasha Helfer Parker, back for Mormon Sex in the News, book club fashion, with this group that I'm trying to get together. We're trying to have a group of Mormon or Mormon competent sex therapists that have gone through the AASECT Sex Therapy supervision. There's only a handful of us in our community, but there's two more that I've invited to the group because they are like just the application away from having their certification. So I'm kind of letting them in the group just a teeny bit early. One of those persons is Braxton Detson, and he'll be on some other time, and so you'll get to know him. But tonight we have the lovely Amy Heffernan on, and I'm just so glad to have her, and I'll have her talk about herself a little bit in a minute. But before we get to that, I just want to get a few little announcements. One is that for those of you who are listening to this through the Mormon Mental Health Podcast, to really consider donating to the podcast. I've been saying this kind of at the beginning of every podcast episode, so you're probably tired of hearing me, but it is not a financially sustainable podcast, and I just love doing it. I think it's such a great resource, and so I'm really asking for donors to step up this year and be willing to donate, whether that's a one-time donation or kind of like a subscription donation. That would be really great. And it doesn't matter if it's, a large sum or just, like a few bucks that you can throw my way. So every little bit helps. I just really hope to keep this resource going. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that on March 11th, I will be doing a presentation at Kansas City Oasis. So if you want more information on that, visit my website, natashaparker.org. For those of you in the Midwest area, it'll be about sexuality. And also, I am seriously considering doing a one-day retreat type thing for those who are struggling with their faith, whether they're nuanced Mormons or leaving Mormonism or something like that, on March 10th in the Kansas City area. So if you're interested in that, please contact me ASAP, because if I can't get at least 15 people to come to that, then I probably won't do it. But if I can get 15 people or more, I'm totally willing to do it. So again, natashaparker.org. You can also Facebook friend me. You can PM me. Is that the right word? PM personal message me. I'm a little tech. Like in some ways I feel like I'm super tech savvy. In other ways it's really kind of bad. So anyway,
all of it works.
All right. With no further ado, Amy,
hello.
Tell us about yourself.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm so thrilled to have you.
Let's see. I am Amy Heffernan. I have a private practice in Redmond, Washington. So in Microsoft land is where I practice. I've been in practice there for almost 9 years. And so it's been a while. And I have been doing my AASECT certification process, which I'm sure you've heard from Natasha is quite a journey. And I'm almost to the end of the marathon and I cannot wait. I'm kind of crawling over it, but I'm almost there. So I'm really excited. I've I've never been embarrassed talking about sex and always been real comfortable. And so it was a perfect fit for me.
And I got to be your supervisor just for a few hours, not one of your main supervisors, but that was so much fun to be able to do that with you. I know you worked with Tina Sellers quite a bit, also up in the Washington area, and she does some really great work. In fact, we might link to her book.
Yeah, let's do it.
Which is about
religious sexual shame,
sex, and the conservative church. Mm-hmm. And so she talks about kind of religious conservatism in general and how that affects sexual shame issues. So really fascinating work that she's doing up there. All right. So we have 500 articles to go through that came out this last month.
Get to it. Lots of meat this week.
And we haven't, I'm sure I'm not even covering everything, but in some of these things we'll just kind of skim over because I plan to actually do podcasts more specifically on them. And one of those is the big news that came out from Josh Weed and his wife, Lolly, with an article on their blog that was called Turning a Unicorn into a Bat, the post in which we announced the end of our marriage. So that caused a lot of discussion and dialogue, on the bloggernacle or whatever we call it these days. Yeah. They came out probably, was it about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, where they came out? Yep. Yeah, they came out as a mixed orientation marriage. Yeah. So
yeah, that was big.
Do you want to start with any thoughts?
Sure.
On this?
Sure. They're my really good friends. So it feels fun to, I like hear about them in the news and see them in my Facebook feed and all the things. And so, yeah, I think it's been big. It's been interesting because they did a big apology. Did you read the whole thing, Natasha?
I did. It was like reading a mini ebook or something.
It was very long, and they were very personal about many, many things in it.
Yes.
Like very open about a lot of things, which I thought that authenticity was really brave of them. I know it's caused some ripples in the mixed orientation marriage community. And so that's been interesting to kind of see some news articles pop up about, what that means for people that are still in mixed orientation marriages, because they're pretty direct with saying this doesn't work. And I think we all have our own stories, right? And they've been really brave in telling their story. And everyone should just be comfortable in their own story is what my hope is for all people,
Oh man. Yeah. This is so complex. I mean, it's one thing to talk about this kind of from a professional or research perspective. And then like any topic, then there's personal stories and whether or not they fit into that particular statistic, right? Or what generally is happening. So, I mean, the things that I'll say about it, I think in general, we know that people tend to go into mixed orientation marriages knowingly, at least, or even where one partner is unknowing because of religious or cultural pressures. I mean, that's kind of the main driver for that to be happening. I don't know that many people would dispute that, even those who are in mixed orientation marriage that they want to support. And
some go in more eyes wide open, knowing that the person's gay, right?
Right.
And then some people
don't
find out later, right? Correct. So I think that's a factor in things. So
it's a huge factor, right? And in our church history, obviously we have the history where gay men in particular were told not to tell a prospective spouse, don't burden your spouse with that information, just work on it yourself and you'll get married, you'll be fine. I mean, that was the rhetoric for
once you start having sex.
Yep.
Yeah. That once you start, doing it, then you're going to not have this, attraction.
And then we also know that sexuality is a really important part of life and sexual expression is a really important part of life. And that we can't just say, well, because you don't fit the particular way that we say is chaste or correct, that then you don't get to express that without consequences.
Right.
And you can say that and you can believe that, but there are consequences to that. Mm-hmm. And the research doesn't show people in mixed orientation marriages thriving very well, so whether or not the divorce rate is significantly higher, right. I think in the 60 to 70%.
Yeah. So I think it's around the 10-year mark. That's pretty significant. Right? I remember hearing that.
And then also that the mental health ramifications are also much higher, whether it's your immune system has more issues, mental health disorders. It's just tough to try to constantly be in battle with something as, as natural as your sexual orientation.
Absolutely. One of the most powerful parts, I feel like, of that post was when Josh was talking about the self-love piece and loving himself as not a broken straight man, but loving himself as a gay man, right? And like the weeds have kind of taken a lot of people on this journey of being so open, right?
Right.
And for him to really describe that to people that, like, for us, we hear those kind of stories all the time, right? We're working with people around their sexual orientation a lot. But for the common Mormon person that might not have a lot of exposure to gay people, understanding that concept of how one might not love themselves because of this part of them, right?
Right.
It's that internalized homophobia that lots of gay Mormons get.
Right.
That is heartbreaking to sit with, right?
And that's a tough one because internalized means you're not really aware of it. So a lot of, I think, the talking back and forth between people, it's hard for me mean, I remember even feeling this way as a Mormon, more Orthodox believer Mormon woman, when people were like, well, you're being oppressed, or you're being brainwashed, or you're being taken advantage of as a woman. And I was like, no, you're talking to Natasha Helfer Parker, I'm super strong.
No, you didn't.
That's right. No, you didn't. I am fully in control of myself, and I'm a leader in my church, and I felt very empowered, and those things were real, those feelings were real. And over time, as I've been more willing to challenge some of those things, it's not like all of that is false now, but at the same time, I can see some points.
Like seeing your own internalized misogyny.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Right. And sometimes you can't see it.
You can't see it when you're in it. I mean, it's like the fish that's in the water and trying to tell you what water
which is like, I think Josh talking about that denial piece in here, right? Also, what was really powerful to me and is like when he started listing all the things that has been said to him about being gay, and it was just like boom, 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 right? And people that are, I was actually listening to a podcast, Mormon podcast, on my drive home today, and they were talking about this self-love deprivation syndrome, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so true for just not people that are gay Mormons, but like lots of people, and some of the big things that we've heard about sexuality that all people have internalized. And I think he laid it out nicely for what it would be like as a homosexual man, a gay man in the Mormon church, getting messages about that kind of stuff. Those bullet points were really powerful to me, I thought.
Yeah. And then at the same time, I will go to bat for these mixed orientation marriages. I get where they're coming from. I understand their loyalty to each other. So even though I think in general they're problematic, and I think that we need to be careful to not set them up as hero stories for people coming into the system. So in other words, I think young people really need to understand the risks going into something like that. And at the same time, I will go to bat for people who, under their value system or under their framework, at least for the time being, feel like it's working for them. Yeah. And that's legitimate. And I am totally willing to honor that. Just like I was willing to honor that when Josh and Lolly came out 5 years ago. My main issue wasn't so much not supporting them in their relationship. It was about how other, especially Mormon families, because of the cultural construct, would use their story to shame people for not having a similar story. And I think, again, most mixed orientation couples are worried about that too. It's not like they're saying everybody should do it like we did it.
Right. All right. There's a part of my heart that aches for them if they, again, are them holding up Josh and Molly's decision now.
Right.
In like the opposite way of like, oh, well, they can't do it, so I guess that means we can't do it. Whereas before they might have been being like, oh, Josh and Molly are doing it, so we can too. And it's like, that's why I'm like, we all have our own narratives. We all need to work on our own story. Is it working for you? Does it feel good to you to be in this marriage? And how do you foster that between you if that's what you want? Right.
Yeah. And what are some options between the traditional spectrums of happily monogamously married and completely divorced? I mean, there's a lot of spectrum in there that I know that I explore with my mixed marriages.
I totally agree with you.
So it's,
how do you open up what monogamy means? Sometimes how do you think about what pornography might mean in your relationship? Like, I know that you've talked a lot about these things, all of the above.
Yeah. All right. But I will be bringing somebody on to talk about that more, because I think that's a really important story. Next. So, Michigan State.
Wow.
Is having quite the story happening there. And, all of these athletes, these female athletes who have come together in a very, very significant way to accuse this abuser. But in that process, I mean, that's not necessarily a story in of itself. I think the bigger part of the story that is applicable to us as a church community is the story of enablers.
Mm-hmm.
The story of enablers. Yes. And this particular woman who kind of started the whole thing, Rachel Denhollander, I hope I'm saying that right, who's an evangelical Christian, wrote quite an article about criticizing the evangelical church on how they enable and protect abusers as a priority to really protecting victims, which kind of bridges right into a lot of the work I'm doing with protectldschchildren.org. And we can talk a little bit about that. But yeah, what are your thoughts about this article? It felt like she was talking about our church, even though she's talking.
I know. I think that there's
general.
so many parallels when you're talking about the greater Christian church. Like, obviously, there's going to be a few differences or a few different words, but that kind of general institution over victim or over personhood happens in all big organized religions, I think, right?
Yeah.
And I do, when you hear the stories about the gymnasts or the Michigan State stuff, it's like my head just is like conking, like, like, how did this man get away with so many women? How did this happen, right?
Yeah.
And then on a church level, how is it that I mean, both of us probably have had so many clients that there's been times when the institution wins over the person that's like been harmed, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And
yeah, in blatant ways and in really kind of subtle ways, right? And that's what even complicates it more. I mean, in ways where the victim will come out and say this happened and it's just not believed. So I would say that's a blatant way, especially when the person who's being accused is a person of stature in the community. And so it's hard to believe that somebody who's been the high priest leader or who's been the bishop or who's in the fake presidency could do something like this.
He worked at the temple. Like, there's just no way that this man could do something like that. So she must be lying.
That's right.
He
or
must be not telling the truth.
More subtle ways where it's not even really picked up, like maybe there's been some assault, or because it's with a teenager, they just kind of shift the teenager into repentance and send him on his mission, or they don't even believe it was date rape. There's no notion of date rape. And so it must have been consensual, or they, it's just so hard because again, the training lacks. And she speaks of some really interesting things. So one of the things that she talks about right off the bat is that she says, church is one of the least safe places to acknowledge abuse because the way it is counseled is more often than not damaging to the victim. There's an abhorrent lack of knowledge for the damage and devastation that sexual assault brings. And it is with deep regret that I say the church is one of the worst places to go for help. So that's pretty rugged. And she says that a big part of that is because from a spiritual perspective, there's such a focus on forgiveness, for forgiving your sinner, or minimizing suffering, because it's kind of like platitudes that are used. She says platitudes like God works all things together for good, or God is sovereign. And she says, even though those can be good biblical truths, when they are misapplied, they dampen the horror of evil. They ultimately dampen the goodness of God. I was like, wow, that's powerful writing.
Yeah. And brave, right?
Yeah, very brave.
I think it's like, I had seen somewhere that said, what does the Me Too revolution in Mormonism look like? Right. And I think for our tribe, this is where it's going to come out, is, in a big significant ways of how has this kind of behavior made it so that people don't feel like church is a safe place to say, hey, my brother did all these things and I know he's going on a mission, but like he did all these things,
Right.
and don't say anything about that because then he won't go on a mission, it just some of the more, like you said, a little bit more subtle, but definitely harmful behaviors that church leaders and or parents or just the community at large kind of continue to push,
Well, and another subtle way that she talks about that I know we have all, been talking about for a long time in Mormon circles, she says, many churches hold poor interpretations of scripture that imply the victim is somehow at fault for dressing or acting a certain way immodestly, that speaking up about abuse is gossip or slander, that forgiveness is moving on without demanding justice for the victims. And these stances are a stark contrast from Jesus's ministry to the marginalized.
Wow, that forgiveness thing. So what do you do when someone comes in that's had something like this happen, Natasha, and they say, I need to forgive this person?
Well, and most people, they don't even bring that up because it's such a part of the assumption that I'm usually the one saying, so, after a few sessions, so you haven't mentioned forgiveness. What's your relationship with that word? Or, oh, well, yeah, like, of course, I know I have to, it's not, it's so ingrained that it's not even something they thought to bring up in session often.
Right.
So then we really talk about what forgiveness can mean, what type of meaning it can have for different people. And I think the biggest mistake people make with the word forgiveness is that somehow it lacks boundaries. Like, if I'm going to be forgiving, then that just means I need to be okay being around that person. I need to
go to all the parties and the Christmases.
Right. And I don't need to press charges because I wouldn't want to ruin their life. And that wouldn't be very forgiving. So we talk a lot about the different ways that forgiveness can play a role without it having to mean those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about you?
I like to say, how do we put forgiveness on the shelf for a minute?
Yeah.
And how do we work on saying, let's not, I think sometimes people feel this pressure to go there really fast because of stuff like this, like church leaders or just the environment of saying it's not Christ-like to not forgive. And people genuinely want to be Christ-like oftentimes, and so they feel like by harboring the anger or harboring hate kind of against perpetrators that they're somehow not being Christ-like. And so kind of slowing that down, I think, is really important, and being able to say, let's just unpack what happened to you, and how do let's try to aim for acceptance before we get to forgiveness, and that's a really big, long process. And sometimes you don't get to forgiveness, and being able to be kind of okay with that too. And
I couldn't agree more. So my approach that I just talked about now is when people are really attached to forgiveness, they come in saying something like, I do not want to forgive this person, and I am so mad that I feel this pressure to forgive this person. Then I'm like, well, hooray for you, because forgiveness is not necessary.
Yeah. Here's your award.
It's not a necessary part of healing from this, and it's not a necessary part of managing this. And if you want to stay in that church paradigm of, oh, well, it's one thing I should do, well, put it in the category of, you should bake bread and do genealogy, and you just don't do it. So it's okay.
Yeah. And one thing I have to say that's been really interesting, because culture absolutely shows up on our couch as therapists. Oh yeah. Right. Yeah. And so, so I remember the courtroom testimonies. Did you see some of those?
Oh yeah. Oh, they were so powerful.
Oh, I got chills, so many times with that one. I don't know if you watched that one girl where she was describing how she can't even smell the lotion that he used to whack his penis against her face. You know what I mean? I mean, it's graphic language, but it was important language to use when she was doing that. Right. Yeah. And being able to face her accuser in that kind of way for a lot of women on my couch in the last month, it has almost been redemptive for them to watch some of those videos. Yeah. Interestingly enough. Right. I mean, I'm not surprised by that, but it's interesting how kind of seeing other people empower themselves through that. Yeah. Has also kind of given them some power. And I think that's why the revolution's happening, right? That's why it's just I think it was something I saw in just the last few months have either been fired or they've resigned or something because of kind of this Me Too stuff. Right.
Right.
And it absolutely trickles into Mormonism. Absolutely. Right. And it's almost been, I can't even think of the word because it's not like the word is exciting for me, but it feels monumental, right?
I think that's been a huge part of the Me Too movement is how monumental we see it, because it's not just, women have been raising their voices about abuse and domestic violence and sexual assault for decades. But for the first time, we are seeing the crumbling of structures in ways that we have not seen.
Yes.
And I know that there's been shared concern about people getting, maybe caught up in those structures that don't believe, that maybe don't deserve to be struck down. But to me, that's a very minimal part of the story, because that's going to be minimal. That's going to be the case no matter what type of movement happens in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But if we focus on that, we miss the point that like forever,
Mm-hmm.
the collateral damage has been thousands, if not millions of women.
Yeah,
so I'm sorry if one or two guys get caught up
mm-hmm.
that maybe don't deserve the type of vitriol that's being thrown their way, but that's not where we need to be focusing our concern at this point.
Right. There's going to be casualties and it'll be minimal.
Yes.
And this
the casualties on the other side
mm-hmm.
have been astronomical. And not just for women, for marginalized men as well. So, I mean, there's tons of men who've been sexually abused or taken advantage of. And there's many male stories in the Me Too movement as well. So it's a power dynamic. And of course, because we're in patriarchy in most of the world, then yes, men are usually the beholders of the other side of that. But that's, Well, so this plays into the protectldschildren.org because I'm involved in that. So I don't want to necessarily talk a lot about that. I'd like to hear more of your thoughts about it.
You know way more than me. So
obviously I'm biased. So I'd like your maybe non-biased approach. But a lot of what you're saying, these stories, I see them now, we can all see them. Sam Young is collecting them on his website. And I've had a lot of people reach out to me, both anonymously and not, about wanting to share stories, and also those who don't want to, but that are feeling empowered by the movement itself. So I'm just always really trying to be careful to say, if you want to stand there in front of the court and face your accuser and use very specific language to say what happened to you, great. If that's empowering for you, great. And if that's not the way that you need to stand up, if the way you need to stand up is to protect yourself and go into a little bit of hiding and pull your covers close and gather your support system, that's brave too. Survival is the name of the game. And everybody has their own journey as far as how they heal. And there's lots of different ways to heal. It's not just one way. But the fact that we can all kind of be at least on the same boat together, regardless of whether one's in the helm or one's in the, in the bunker or whatever these names are for boat parts, it's okay. We're all still we're all still playing a role in that boat.
Absolutely. It's again that theme of how do you own your own story, right? So if it feels good to share it and it feels like it needs to be heard, and that is a therapeutic kind of experience for you to kind of just do that, I'm like 100% supportive of that. And I've known many, many people who've also, interestingly enough, with the movement thinking, is something wrong with me if I don't share?
Right.
And I'm like, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Yeah, I agree with that.
Absolutely not. Like, you know yourself better than anybody, right? Which is like the theme of this podcast might be like, own your story, like if you're in a mixed orientation marriage, like own it. Is this what you want? Is it working for you? Is it not? If you've had an experience that feels extremely traumatic for you on an institutional church level and you want to share it, then own that. Right.
Yeah.
And if you don't, that's okay too,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And these two articles, because I'm going to link also to the Houston press conference coverage that we got, but these really are linked together because, again, one of the women said, church leaders are more likely to support specific victims if the abuser has no ties to their own ministry. So this is where it's very typical for group tribal dynamics to come in, right? So it's like, something happened bad in the neighbor's family. Well, that's awful. They're really bad people, right? But something bad is happening in my family. You better not be talking about my family. It's like, you better back up because that's true. My family, right? So there's something natural about being protective about your own tribe. And we've definitely seen that pushback through the Protect LDS Children. I mean, I think that if we all sat together, I can't imagine one person wouldn't say, yes, I value the protection of LDS children, right? Yes, I do not want to be part of a system that would risk LDS children to have sexual shame or abuse, right? I think most Mormons would agree with that. Like, those are pretty common denominator values. And yet, because their own family is getting called out, their own church is getting called out, then I've seen several things. One is that the stories are being deemed as non-believable. Like somebody's just coming up with all those stories. Somebody's making them all up, which I can guarantee you, I've been in contact with many of the people that have submitted those stories. So that's just not true. And I know Sam Young, and it's not true. That's just not true.
Yeah.
The other thing that happens is that you'll minimize the, okay, so yeah, maybe we have one bad apple, but that doesn't mean that the system that we're a part of is bad. Therefore, we don't really want to look at the systemic practices that actually do increase risk quite a bit. And like I've said before, it's not just when blatant sexual abuse happens in the bishop's office, which I would deem to say is not as common, not very common really at all. I'd be surprised if that number is maybe, higher than 5% of the interviews. And at the same time, the sexual shaming that's happening behind closed doors, I would say is almost always, like I would be surprised if it's not, 90% or more that's happening. But again, because of internalized normalization of this, it's hard for us to even recognize that we're being sexually shamed, so a lot of people are pushing back with, well, it wasn't sexually shaming for me. For me, the repentance process was very lovely and loving. And even though they're saying things, like I had a prior bishop reach out and say, I would have never shamed anybody. All I ever did was tell them, how much they just needed to love the Lord and never have this sin and never do this and never do that. And the dangers and the things that would lurk behind pornography and just his language. I was like, he doesn't even recognize that what he just sent me is like 3 paragraphs of absolute, like, if I showed that to anybody who wasn't in our community, they'd be like, this is the kind of stuff that people are saying to young kids. Like, that's scary.
Yeah.
That's shaming.
Absolutely.
And he was, sending me that message trying to say, I would never shame, which I believe is sincere. He would never want to shame.
Right.
That's not his intent. His intent is to protect, but because of our culture, he is shaming. So it's tricky.
Yeah, it is tricky.
Really tricky.
And I think that, like, if people lean into fear about any time when you're being pressed to look at something, like in the system, right? Racial system, patriarchal system, whatever, it feels kind of scary sometimes, right? And I agree that, like, you can say, most of my bishop experiences have been great, but that doesn't mean that that's true for everyone,
Right.
And
Right.
So, and I think even bishops, I genuinely feel like, they're trying to do good. Right. And so I think, like, the movement of Protect LDS, is it protectldskids.org? I don't want to say it wrong.
protectldschildren.org. And we'll link to that so people can go look at it if they want to. Yeah.
Okay. Right. That movement is just saying we need to increase our awareness, right? There's nothing wrong with bishops being more aware of how sexual shaming looks, what sexual abuse is, domestic violence. I know you're going to be talking about that at some point, what that is and what that looks like. And how do you refer when you need to refer?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's okay not to know everything. Right. And I know many, many good bishops. Yeah. And I also know many bishops that, like you say, don't even know what harm they could possibly be doing. Like, that's a great example of you saying, like, obviously that bishop had no idea that it was just seeping with shame.
Right.
And so
he was feeling very defensive because he's loving, he's wanting to help people, and that's what he thinks he's doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so just shining a light on it.
Yeah.
Like, we don't need to be defensive. Let's just look at that for a minute and be aware and increase our awareness on it, And so whenever like you feel that anxiety, like with anything in any relationships in any system, I always say, just pause for a minute and stay curious about that. Right. And so I would love for people to stay more curious about what this might mean. Right. Because we can always have things to learn. So if there's a currently serving bishop that wants to examine this a little more, I'm like, lean into it. Right.
Right.
Lean into what you might learn from hearing people's stories around this.
Right.
Learn how to be adaptive to what that might mean, what mental health and emotional health could look like in your office. Because you do have influence over people, right?
Yeah.
And you could be that person that someone could say, wow, that bishop really, really rallied for me and was a real advocate for me, right?
Right. Yeah.
So lean into it, bishops, if you're listening to this.
And those stories are out there too. There are actually great bishops that don't sexually shame, that don't ask those questions, that, you know, do a really great job.
I'm curious if you guys are you guys getting a lot of pushback on that?
I know Sam Young is getting pushback. He's talked quite openly that his stake leaders are asking him to stop talking about these things. And I don't know how that's going to turn out necessarily for him, if there's going to be some type of disciplinary action taken against Sam. I sure hope not. I can't see how that would help the image of the church to, you know, discipline people who are trying to shine a light on potentially sexual abuse that's happening, you know, within the system. I mean, we can revisit the whole Catholic lessons that they had to learn, you know, in the last 2 decades for sure. So
do you
hope
think
we can learn from that.
Do you think the bill that came out that they were trying to support about not being able to record bishopric meetings was in response to this?
Well, I think it's in response to a lot of things that have been happening in the LDS church, you know, from people like, there's, you know, Runnels, who wrote the CES letter and he recorded his excommunication. I think that there have been several people who have recorded their disciplinary councils who've been facing those kinds of things. I think that there's a lot of times now that I'm noticing that there's a recording of, you know, President Oaks came to the Wichita stake, you know, and so somebody recorded. And I'm also hearing that they're asking, even though they're speaking to the public, which seems a little weird to me because it's a public discussion, like in a stake, to start off by saying, please don't record. So that seems a little weird because it's a public forum. They should be prepared to be able to defend what they're speaking about publicly, I would think. So I think there's a lot of things, and this could be one of them.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think, I forget now how many states have those kinds of laws in place. I don't think it's the majority by any means. So yeah, that was very interesting. That just happened in Utah just in the last week. And it was shut down through social media. Pushback on social media. So it matters that we speak up and be aware about these things.
Yeah.
All right. So the next one, which again kind of keeps up with the theme of modesty rhetoric. So there was a dress code that came out for church proms. So I've noticed that a lot of LDS churches are now coming up with their own proms and actually discouraging their youth to attend their high school proms. My guess for that, and what I've heard through the grapevine, I don't think these are from the first presidency kind of an idea. I think these are more like kind of
regional or local.
Local concerns. And so here in the United States, there's a lot of stakes who are providing stake proms. And I'm guessing that has to do with not liking the after parties that happen at a lot of high school proms, where there can be alcohol or sex or, you know, the typical things that we're all afraid our kids are doing at social events. So, but there's a church prom dress code. So let's look at this really fast. So boys have one line. So they're supposed to wear a tie and a button shirt and no low rider pants. And girls have like a paragraph. So
it's like lengthy, lots of rules.
Sleeves should cover the shoulder and top of the arm. There should be no cleavage, no bras or bra straps showing through sheer fabrics, no low necklines in the front or the back, no open, sheer, bare lace-ups in front or back, no midriff showing with arms raised or when dancing, no tight or revealing clothes of any kind. That's the tricky one. No sheer, lacy, or see-through fabric in areas that otherwise should be covered. Again, I'm not sure what that all means, but hems should be no shorter than 3 fingers width above the knee. The back of the dress must be higher than bra strap. No low backs. Get your dress approved via text. Wow.
Ooh. Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. And this is actually written on a blog called Beauty Redefined by Lexi Kite and Lindsay Kite. They're both PhDs.
Follow their Instagram. It's so good.
Yeah. So this is kind of the first time I've heard of them. So they're
Natasha.
LDS.
They are
Okay,
amazing.
tell me about them.
Okay, 2 girls. They are LDS. I don't know I don't know how, like active, not active, whatever, but they actually recently did a TED Talk that is worthy of a watch also. And for probably like 3 years, they've been just pushing this message about we are more than our bodies. Right. And it's awesome. It's like this little hit in your arm on your social media. Like I love it when they post on Instagram. Like, I'm like, oh, you need that. Cause you're like getting your binge on, and then like everybody has happy lives. And why am I not all these things enough? And then you get to their feed and you're like, preach. I always like comment on their things. I'm all preach, sisters, like that's good stuff. But basically, like, they really broke this down, and they said, like, our hearts were broken when we saw this flyer for the church prom. Okay. And I have to say, like, our region up here, they do a church prom. The kids love it. Like, they totally love it. Right.
Yeah.
They get really super excited. But what this continues to do is it just continues to sexualize the young women. Okay. About being a body part, kind of, these parts of you are bad. Your cleavage is bad. No, don't show your bra. Don't show your shoulders. Don't show your legs. It just continues this like message of like, our parts are bad. Right. And then it just continues
and that
to
there's
sexualize.
something bad about being somewhat sensual or sexy, or being able to, because I get it that we're not just our sexiness, right? Or that we should necessarily get all of our value in showing off our sexualized bodies. And I know that objectification definitely goes that way in our culture, but there's also something really, I think, almost like a thief that's stealing any type of feminine sexuality from somebody's ability to feel attractive and nice and sexy.
And to dress up and say, I look really pretty today.
Yeah.
Right. And yes, like maybe my dress is tight fitting, but I look good. Like,
yeah.
Like, how do you have body confidence too?
And my body
it
shape
sucks
is like
the
amazing.
desire out of Mormon women.
Well, yeah, we can talk about, this, I'm sorry, but this comes back to bite people in the butt all the time in the work we do with sexual desire once people are married, right? Because if you can't grow into the comfort of your own female body, then you're not going to automatically be able to do that when you get married. Because
people internalize this. That's what happens if we're talking about internalization, right? They start to internalize, my cleavage is bad.
Yep.
Right? When I'm like, your cleavage is hot and sexy, and that's a part of you that, like, and so it's just, this kind of stuff, it just is really hard to read. It's really hard for me to read. And it's also
actually, unfortunately, also deals with different body types. Because I'm sorry, you can put the same dress on a girl that has, size A breasts, and the same dress on a girl that has size D breasts. Yep. And the size A breast girl would be able to wear that dress, and the size D girl would not. Yeah. So I see a lot of young women who have larger chest sizes have really bad body posture, because they're almost like hunching over to not show this body part of theirs. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's your body. It's your body.
And these girls, the Beauty Redefined girls, talk a lot about this idea about body monitoring, where we're constantly like, oh, if I sit this way, my love handles are going to be hanging out. Oh, if I'm in a swimming suit, then my thigh gap isn't there. And so I don't want to go in and they talk a lot about how this is destructive to girls.
Yes.
Where they constantly have to feel like they're body monitoring. Oh, is my skirt 3 fingers, like, is it below or above my knee, only 3 fingers length? It's just, instead of just being at the prom, having fun, dancing, enjoying your teenage, enjoying your youth, like all the things. It's just like, instead it's just this, like, you need to text us and we give approval if that dress is okay or not. That increases women doing the body monitoring stuff. Right?
It's so unfortunate. All right. Well, we'll definitely link to that. They've got a great kind of like infogram, kind of a way to teach modesty in a healthier way. They've got some really good resources. This is, unfortunately, I guess, according to Amy, the first time I've heard of them. So I'll look into them more.
There's one more thing that they have that's fantastic is they have, I think for like $100 or $120, they have kind of this program that you can kind of download that really helps you work out your own kind of self-body image, self-acceptance, body acceptance kind of stuff. And it's really great. So I recommend it to clients a lot.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, good.
Yay,
all right. Next we have, so there was an article in the New York Times that is not Mormon centric, but it is definitely an issue that lots of Mormons care about. And it's called What Teenagers Are Learning from Online Porn. And not that we need to necessarily go into it a whole lot, because I think that we have talked a lot about this topic on lots of podcasts, but I thought it had some good information in it, and it definitely did not support kind of the approach of fight the new drug and those kinds of more either, approaches that are focused in on addiction or shame or things of that nature. And it's fairly long. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just kind of link to it. And maybe if we've had a chance to look it over, we'll come back to it. But in general, I just think I like to have resources that are not necessarily always Mormon centric, but that are concerned about things that we're concerned with as well. And we all have a lot of common denominators on that. And then how about breastfeeding? Did you see that article?
Yes. You're talking about the Utah one, right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I guess there's a breastfeeding bill advancing. Not sure exactly where. I'm not sure if it's for the whole state of Utah. Is this for the whole state of Utah? I'm guessing it is.
I think it's just in the legislature right now.
Neither one of us are in Utah. But one of the things that was in here that I thought was interesting is that I guess Utah and Idaho are currently the only two states in the union that do not have a law protecting mothers for breastfeeding. And I was like, what?
Oh, especially with how many babies
the
there
land of the mothers?
The land of milk and honey and breast milk. The land
of milk and honey isn't protecting their milk and honey?
Whoa. It's just so strange. As an outsider.
Crazy. So, okay, so we have Mormons who are like really big into motherhood.
Yep.
And are really encouraging women to be mothers. And many Mormon women find great, wonderful identity in that and love being mothers and are having lots of children. And yet, again, the modesty rhetoric is getting in the way of being able to allow something as natural and normal as breastfeeding to occur.
What are they asking in the bill?
All right, let me just read through this a little bit, okay? So the House Business and Labor Committee voted 6-5 in favor. So 6-5, not like, 10-2.
Okay.
6-5, so this barely kind of made it. Okay. In favor of the Breastfeeding Protection Act that was sponsored by a Republican, Justin Fawson.
A man, in parentheses.
A man, but he at least was in favor. I mean, he's the one who's sponsoring this, so this is great. And so he says, I don't feel like we should ever relegate a mom to a restroom to breastfeed their child. Hello. Don't you know that cell phones have feces on them because we're in restrooms with them all the time? So just the thought of having to, feces residue, I guess is what I'll say.
And babies doesn't go together well.
So the idea of breastfeeding with feces residue kind of in the air is not something that is really appealing to me or my child. And so there's a big woman why I'm running the bill. I'm seeking to further normalize breastfeeding and allow moms to feed as needed. So Fawson said Utah and Idaho are the only two states that don't have a law that specifically authorizes women to breastfeed in any private or public location. And this is like the Mormon Belt, right? Now, Republican Kurt Webb of Providence was one of 5 male lawmakers, so they were all male, who voted against this. And he said the bill lacks any standard of modesty. So yes, I'm going to get very condescending here. But this seems to say you don't have to cover up at all. I'm not comfortable with that at all. I'm just not, because this is, of course, all about him. It's really in your face. And I'm like, no, it's really in the baby's face. But if it's in your face, that's a whole nother issue. And maybe we need to talk about.
And if you're trying to sneak a peek at a breastfeeding boob, buddy.
And many mothers flocked to the hearing, some in support and others who actually subscribe to Webb's point of view. So again, we internalize this. It's always fascinating to me how women are sometimes we are our own worst enemies. We'll stand against ourselves. And he says, oh, here's a mother. She says, I think they ought to try to stay modest while breastfeeding. It's very easy to do. I don't even know what that means or how we would define that, but whatever. And I don't think that you should be asked to go feed in a public restroom, said Elise Jones. Most public restrooms that I've been in are nowhere where I'd want to eat or where I'd want to feed my baby, obviously. And this is very much an American issue, because if you're going to, I remember my husband telling me stories. He went to Brazil on his mission, and women are breastfeeding right there in the sacrament meeting. And, as a Mormon American boy who grew up in Kansas, and he's giving a talk, and all of a sudden she's plopping out her boob and, getting the 2 or 3 year old even to be breastfeeding still. That was a cultural shock for him. And I'm like, well, I'm so glad. I'm very glad that you were faced with that cultural shock. And he was too, he could recognize, wow, like there's a whole different way of looking at this, that I am coming with this very different cultural background where I'm the problem, obviously it's not a problem for the Brazilian men who are seeing this all the time. Right. And so nobody's like,
because it's normalized to them. Yeah.
So this is an American Mormon problem. And I'm just fascinated that of all the states, Utah and Idaho, where so many
and out of 11 legislatures, 5 voted against this bill.
And all men.
All men. Were any of the 6 women, I wonder?
I don't know. It doesn't say that.
But the 5 that voted against it were men.
Yeah.
Because of modesty. I have to say, most women that are breastfeeding in public are very subtle about it.
Yeah. I breastfed in public all the time.
I breastfed in public all the time too. And it wasn't like I was like, hey, everybody, here are my titties. Like, I was not doing that. I was like, oh, baby, like lift my shirt up, put the baby on the boob. And like, that was basically it. And then you can still
I did not go out of my way. Like I never had those over blankets or I felt like that caused even more tension.
Oh, I can even see my baby under those.
And
but some women, it feels good to do that. Right. Yeah. So I'm just like, do what works for you, but you shouldn't expect that we need to not do that just because heaven forbid somebody might see our nipple.
I'm just saying that it's a very good thing nobody ever approached me about that, because I was like not a very happy breastfeeder to begin with, not a very happy pregnant woman, not a very happy woman about the year and a half after having a baby. Just a very good thing.
Yeah.
Nobody chose to approach me around that issue.
Yeah.
And I remember feeding my baby in sacrament, and I don't think anybody noticed.
Yeah. Because again, most women are pretty subtle about it.
Yeah.
They're not trying to be tittillating. They're not trying to be sexual. They're trying to feed a child.
Yes. And if you find us titillating and sexual because we're doing that, that's called a fetish, which is actually kind of fine to have. And you can go talk about that with your therapist and leave me alone.
Yes. Right. Not our problem.
not my problem.
So it's surprising to me that in 2018 that we're still having this discussion. It feels like, are we still here? Like it puzzles me sometimes, to be honest with you. Like, how are we still talking about this? Like, people have been breastfeeding since the beginning of time.
Yeah, we've become more covered up over time than less covered up. So, all right, the next one, and this is the last one we'll talk about tonight. So it's called A Powerful Letter to Young Mormons About Sex and What They Need to Understand. It was published in LDS Living. And I guess it's an excerpt from Letters to a Young Mormon written by Adam S. Miller, who is a philosophy professor. So he kind of comes at this as a letter he would write to his own children. So he's not a sex therapist and he's not a, therapist in general, but he kind of has his own thoughts about the law of chastity. So since these kinds of things tend to get a lot of social media attention, I thought we might go through it a little bit. I guess I would kind of give this maybe a B to a B plus and sometimes a B minus on sex positivity. So it's not bad. I think there's some really interesting things he says that definitely fly in the face of what a lot of cultural Mormonism does, which is just try not to think about sex at all. And so I think there's a lot of things that he really tries to normalize. And I can't quite put my finger on why I would not give it an A. And I think that's because there's just, again, some provocative language at times. And what I mean by provocative language is scary language, kind of like it touches your emotional, your emotional feelers. And he uses the word must a lot. Like, you must follow the law of chastity. You must, instead of always, I'm always more about following the principle of agency and personal agency that we have in the church when we're teaching our kids. So it's more like, here's this principle. This is why I think, it might be an important principle to think about. This is why I think maybe, if you're going to believe in God or Heavenly Father, why, he, she, they would have wanted us to consider this principle for your own benefit. What are you going to do about it? Right. So versus the, you must follow this principle.
It doesn't work for people.
Right. So that's some of why I put him in the B category. Okay. But I'll go through some of this. I mean, he kind of starts off by comparing sex to a hunger. So drive and so he normalizes it, just like you're hungry for food, or, you have a need for sleep, or, other needs that your body has. He talks about
Which
how,
I like that. I don't hate that.
Yeah, that was good.
Okay.
I liked it too. He says this new hunger is different from the others. You'll die if you don't eat and breathe, but you won't die if you don't have sex. Though, to be honest, you may sometimes feel like you will. So he has a sense of humor. I think that's good. And he talks a lot. I mean, a lot of what I liked about it, he really talked about noticing the hunger versus trying to. So my favorite part that he said, so I'll read this here for you. This hunger for intimacy is like an ocean. It will come like a flood and you will feel lost at sea. I didn't particularly like that. Okay. Because again, doesn't have to be this negative.
You don't have to feel lost.
Right. But in order to become an adult, you'll have to learn how to swim. So I do like the metaphors of like, I think the church came out with a little video that compared sexuality to an ocean, and there's nothing wrong with swimming in the ocean, but you do have to learn how to manage the ocean. I thought, okay, I can get behind that metaphor. That's okay. And you are no more responsible for being at sea than you are for needing to breathe. So in other words, like, it's not your fault that you're having these, feelings, and that these feelings are strong and that you're experiencing this. So that I very much liked.
Except I don't love the fault. It's not your fault thing. Like, I'm like, no, this is great. We get to do this. Like,
right.
This is amazing. Like, I just that a little bit is like, again, that like, dun, 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 like.
Yeah, right. That's what I meant by a little bit of provocative language. Like, you're at sea, it's scary, there's a little bit of, this seems a little heavy, instead of more lighthearted, like you're saying. Okay. And though some may say different, you're not guilty because the ocean is wet. You did not choose this hunger, but even if you had, the task would be the same. You must choose what to do with it. And this is where I don't like his language. You must learn how to care for this hunger and be chaste. The must, you must, you should, so there's a little bit of heaviness in that instead of just kind of making it more like a dialogue. Caring for this hunger will take practice and patience. Be kind to yourself as you stumble through. So I like the first part, be kind to yourself. I don't know why it's always having to be a stumble,
Or that you're going to mess up, or that it's going to feel out of control and you're going to feel lost and dark, instead of saying, absolutely, you can have control over your sexuality. It's this gift that you get. Like, I don't know. I just, the doom, the kind of the stumble, that kind of like, it's going to be hard. You're going to have to fight this. There's going to be tension around it.
Right. This I like. He says chastity as a way of practicing care. So that's an interesting way to put it. Doesn't purge or deny this hunger. So in other words, being chaste doesn't mean you won't have this hunger. So I did like that, that he's saying
this is a part of it.
Yeah, this chastity is not about whether or not you experience, arousal or feelings, which I think is a big piece in the For Strength for Youth pamphlet that I really would love to cross out, is that idea that even the thought or the arousal of desire is bad, because that's just a normal part of life.
Yep.
So you are chaste when you are full of life, and you are full of life when you are faithful to the hungers that root it. This is where his philosophy degree probably comes in, because I'm like, you lost me, dude. And if you're talking to young people, but whatever, like you're being way too poetic.
I'm a sex therapist and you lost me.
But I'm sure it sounds beautiful. But again, I think he's trying to get at this point that chastity is not about diminishing life or passion, or you just have to manage, life and passion, which, I can kind of get behind that. Okay, so this part, again, I probably would have languaged it differently, but I like what he's saying. He says, to care for this hunger, you must do just as you did with the others. You cannot get rid of your hunger either by pandering to it or by purging it. So I think he's saying both extremes are not going to be helpful for you. In other words, just giving in to every hunger you have and just doing whatever the heck you want is not good, but also trying to pretend that the hunger isn't there or trying to get rid of the hunger is not good either. He says both strategies deny your hunger. I liked that.
Yeah, I like that too.
Church talk about sexual purity is meant to keep you close to life and warn you against trying to end your hunger by carelessly indulging it. But while talk of purity may help constrain your hunger, it can also conspire with the impulse to purge it. And trying to get rid of your hunger by purging it, even for the sake of purity, will just as surely leave you spiritually dead as indulging it. The measure of chastity is life, and life by divine design is messy. I found that very refreshing from a Mormon perspective.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, kind of that saying I always used to say to us, repression leads to excess, right? And I feel like he's kind of like basically saying that here.
Right.
Just like you have to find that balance.
Right. That it's not, that all extremes are not really measured in health.
Yes.
And we see this, in the research. Obviously, it's so interesting. I keep mentioning this research that Joshua Grubbs is doing around people who self-diagnose as sex addicts or porn addicts, and that they're not necessarily people who are looking at porn or having sex more often than the normal population, but they are definitely pathologizing themselves much more. So that idea. The one that
they did at BYU? Was this a BYU one?
No, no, that wasn't a BYU one, although there was a BYU one as well that kind of came to similar conclusions.
Okay.
But it's not the initial stuff that Joshua Grubbs was doing. I think it's somewhere up north. I want to say Minnesota or something like that, but I might try to link to that as well. So I don't know. I liked that.
With a few tweaks, it would have been.
Yeah.
You could like, it doesn't sound like there would have needed to be like great tweaks to pass like the Natasha stamp, right?
No, that's why I gave it like a B+ sometimes, and sometimes like more like a B-. And if I could have just crossed out a sentence here or there, I would have been probably pretty happy.
Yeah.
He does talk about an experience he had with the first girl he kissed, and there were some things here that I thought were a little bit kind of ignoring what he just said. So he said, I kissed a girl for the first time when I was 14 and she was 16, and I was surprised by her, which is fine. That's a nice way to feel. When we kissed, I crossed a mild but important line. You only get one first kiss. I'm a little like, that's true, but do we want to make such a big deal about it, right? Because then it can have a lot of meaning that it doesn't need to have. Like, first kisses can be really great and first kisses can be kind of awful, and they're learning experiences either way, and they don't really have to mean much more than that. But he said, but I didn't really want to cross it. So this is kind of where I see his internalized maybe Mormon boy shame coming out, like this.
Your Mormon is showing.
Yeah. And it was winter after school, after a basketball game, and we were waiting outside, and she asked me to kiss her. I shuffled my feet and made excuses, and she asked me again, and I said, okay. So he was conflicted. It was sweet. I'll never forget it. She will always matter to me. I don't know that your first kiss always needs to matter to you, but that's all right. But still, I was uneasy. I knew I hadn't kissed her because I loved her or because I was starved for a physical connection. Though I did care about her and I was hungry. The truth is that I was afraid to kiss her. And in the end, I only kissed her because I was afraid. So I don't totally, first of all, I don't totally agree with his experience, which is bad, right? Because I'm supposed to honor his experience, but I'm guessing he was more uncomfortable because he was curious, not so much afraid.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a little bit of fear because anytime you're doing something for the first time, it is a little scary.
Absolutely.
But I guess what I'm really concerned about is almost this expectation that there needed to be love involved or deep, intimate connection before there's even just a few of the affectionate things that we do in kind of romantic relationships.
Yep. Right. Like having your children think I need to love the person that I have my first kiss with. might not be totally realistic for people. I
No.
didn't love my first kiss, but, or do I think that I'm going to stress that to my own children? Right.
No, I think it's kind of just how you start figuring life out and you start exploring and
Yeah. I think that like the evolution of sexuality, like little step-by-step things, is a really beautiful process. Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And I
And
think
love is a big thing. I mean, and I don't want kids to always think that positive sexual feelings equate to love either. I think if you make love too important, they're like, oh yeah, I'm in love because I'm feeling all this stuff, and
this
it's like,
must be love because
right.
I am horny with this person, That's not love.
Yeah.
I always tell like premarital Mormon couples, like, sex is not a reason to get married. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that like plays into this idea of like, I want to have sex, so I must love this person. I want to have sex with this person. So like, we should get married in 3 months of knowing each other. And I'm like, that's a big decision.
Yeah.
We don't need to like make a marriage decision just because you are sexually attracted to somebody. Right.
Right.
And you don't need to think that I'm in love with someone because I'm sexually attracted to them. Right.
And you might love someone you're not sexually attracted to, making
Absolutely.
Josh and Lolly.
Full circle here.
Full circle.
Full circle here at the Mormon podcast, sex podcast, Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just don't think that those two shows be conflated. Like, we should make room to explore how sexual attraction or even curiosity and then love, or even like different levels of connection, right? Like the type of like that you have for somebody, and then the first kind of ways that you might love somebody, and then deep, intense love for somebody, right? So,
and those feelings are really big when you're a teenager.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the first time that you fall in love is a really big feeling,
Yeah.
So.
And I'm not a fan of minimizing that and just calling it a crush. I think those feelings are real, but
absolutely,
but not making it feel like it has to be there all the time, or else you've done something really bad or wrong. So,
or like you should feel guilty if you kiss someone that you don't love, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, oh, you're just figuring this out, like holding hands, cuddling, kissing, like, like it's all part of the experience of teenagehood, Yeah.
He does talk about mindful practice, again, kind of just noticing things instead of really letting them overtake you. So things like shame or fear or guilt. I liked that. I thought that was a good mindfulness practice. He also talks about, asking for help if you're confused, you're not alone. Talk to your parents, talk to your leaders, talk to your bishop. Again, that's sometimes a double-edged sword, because even though I do agree that kids should have lots of resources, adult resources to them, again, we go back to the concerns we have about non-trained bishops talking about sexuality in the ways that we do in our church, and how that can be shaming in ways we don't even realize, And he finishes just kind of like out of the blue. He says, if you're attracted to people of the same sex, know that God loves you. If you identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transsexual, know that God loves you. He sees you. He hears you. He understands you. He knows your heart. He knows that it's hard, and he wants to be a part of your life. He doesn't really talk about, and he says the body of Christ cannot be made whole without you. So he doesn't go into repentance or doing anything about it. It's just this kind of little paragraph at the very end. He doesn't really offer any solutions, but at least he does what the Family Acceptance Project really encourages, which is be affirming,
non-rejecting behavior.
Right, be loving. So that was just kind of a little nugget there that he says at the end. So that's that. That's our review of that piece. And it's not the worst thing I've seen out there by any means.
I do have to say that any conversations that help facilitate change in the dialogue around sexuality, or change in the dialogue around shame and sexuality, like, I still feel happy about that. Like, yes,
that's
not
exactly
perfect,
right.
But still, like, yes, we're changing the narrative. Like,
that's exactly right.
Yeah. And it seems like his piece really tries to do that. And so
I think it comes from a really good place from him, that he has really wonderful intentions, that he's obviously trying to address inappropriate shame, that he's trying to normalize sexuality. So there's some really, all of the foundational pieces in this piece is what I really liked about it.
Yeah. Can I tell one experience that we had this week?
Yes, please.
Okay. So there's a sex educator up here named Amy Lang up in the Northwest. She's fantastic. Her stuff is called Birds, Bees, and Kids. So like,
I've heard of her. Yes.
Yeah. She's super, super good. So I had wanted to see her for quite some time, like I just wanted to see her in action, presenting, all that stuff. Finally got a chance to do it like last Tuesday night. And the biggest highlights that I took from her, because if like we're on the topic of talking to your kids about sex, which I know you've talked about, but she said the ideal age to really give them the details of the mechanics is age 5.
Oh yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yes. And so then of course I'm like, I got some catching up to do. I have a 7-year-old that knows about the sperm and the eggs, but he does not know about the penis and the vagina and all the other ways to have sex, So we had to come home and, and I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. So we finally just like sat them down and most of the blanks they knew. Right. But just give the final blank,
Yeah.
It was, and again, this idea of how do you keep your cool with your kids? Like, it's, if they don't come with all of the values around sexuality, they are an open book. Right.
Yep.
And so you just kind of saying, oh, here's how you put together the ingredients for chocolate chips. And here's how you make a baby. Right. And they're just like sponges, like, oh, okay, that's how it is. Then the other interesting thing that she said was by the time your kids go into the middle school, they need to know anal sex, oral sex, blow job, like fingering, like all the words. She's like, by the time they go into middle school, you as their parent are responsible for letting them know what all those words are. I was like, wow, so just reminding our listeners out there, like it is your wonderful responsibility as a parent to be that resource of good information for your kids, and so.
Well, I will totally back you up on those things for 2 reasons. Well, I'll just say a few things that I think parents might be going, wait a minute. So one of the things I think parents often say is, well, if I tell them about fingering and anal sex and blowjobs, won't that be more likely that then they'll engage in those behaviors? Because, if they didn't know about them before, but now they do. And actually, this is some of the thing that comes up at protectlbschildren.org that actually does happen is when the bishop will say something like, do you masturbate? And the kid's like, no. And then, but he doesn't know what that means. And so he goes back home and looks up masturbation and all of a sudden
I know
the races, right? But that's very different. That's very different than giving a kid a word, not explaining it, and then the kid not knowing where to go find information about it.
Yeah.
It's very different from saying, hey, here's the word that you might hear from your friends. This is kind of the clinical word, masturbation. Some other ways it's talked about. It's like jacking off or,
wanking it, or here's all the slang.
Grinding, whatever, whatever people use. And this is what it means. Then there's no need to go look it up, first of all, because they have the information. And we know through research that the more information kids have, actually, the longer they wait to actually make sexual decisions that maybe we'd be uncomfortable with them making. So that's one
and
thing.
The more empowered they are to keep themselves safe.
Right.
That's the other piece of that, right?
Right. Because if they don't know those things, then all of a sudden their friends can either make fun of them, bully them, take advantage of them. All of those kinds of things can happen. My favorite story about this for me, not that I think my parents would have even known to tell me this, but I remember somebody asking me, and I this boy must have really thought this was funny to do this, but he said, so are you a virgin? Are you a virgin? And this was middle school. And I was like, a virgin, huh? Okay. The only way I've heard of virgins is the Virgin Mary. The Virgin Mary is Catholic. But no, I am not Catholic. So I said, no, I am not a virgin.
Oh.
So that got around real quick. And,
but I will grow up to be a sex therapist. So
my middle school experiences probably played a role in that. So anyway.
Love it.
But then back to your 5-year-old and 7-year-old, it's so interesting how at that age they are not embarrassed.
Yeah.
Embarrassed. It's just like, oh, they are like, okay.
Or Amy Lang says they don't have the ooh factor yet.
Right. Which happens right about 9, 10, 11.
Right. You tell them that and they're all, oh, don't talk to me. No, I don't want to,
Yeah. And a very simple way just to role model that is just like, well, so yeah, there's sperm that comes from the man or the dad. And then there's eggs, kind of like chickens and birds have eggs, but moms have them up inside of them, in their uterus. And so the sperm has to get to the eggs. The sperm comes out of the penis, and you've probably noticed your penis sometimes gets hard, right? Does that happen? Well, so does dad's. And so it does that because for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons it does that is so that it can go into the vagina, which is mom's part. And so then the sperm comes out and gets to the egg, and that's what we call sex. And usually, people have sex when they love each other and when they want to make babies, and not just for babies, but for fun too, because it's fun. And that's it. How long did that take me? 2 minutes? Less than 2 minutes to say all that.
Right. Exactly.
Do you have any questions? So that's it. And off they go. They're usually like, oh, okay, well, can we go play?
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been a great discussion. We went a little bit over an hour, but again, we had so much stuff to talk about. Thank you so much for joining me. Any closing thoughts from you, or?
Oh, no, it was fun talking.
Yeah, this is fun. We've really liked this.
I appreciate it.
We've liked this format.
It was super fun to talk. Lots going on. Lots of fun sex topics, Well,
I look forward for you to be on the panel again, and hopefully next time there won't be as many people having babies or doing trainings or all the ways that people are getting busy these days in our field. So. All right, Amy, we'll see you soon.
Good. Job security,
Yeah, that's right. So
hey, have a good one.
You too. And goodbye, everybody. Again, remember to donate. There's a button on the page to be able to do that. Super easy to go hit that, especially if you find these kinds of discussions valuable, which I get a lot of feedback from people that they're valuable. And I can tell that they're valuable because they're downloaded thousands of times by people. And so that's exciting to see, but it hasn't quite transferred into the value of money yet. And we do need money, whether we like to think of that or not, to make these things possible, because websites cost money to maintain, and storage costs money to maintain, and they try to pay me for my time, and all of those kinds of things that the Open Stories Foundation is trying to do. So please support us and this project. And for those of you who are Mormon Sex Info listeners, thanks for subscribing or for listening, and we will see you next month.
Thank you. Bye.
We took the long road home, turned minutes into miles. And as the evening traveled on, the sunset bathed your smile. We stopped beneath the desert stars, wrapped in each other's arms. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth.
It's been a long road here, a trail with tears, pain and sorrow too.
But through every storm we traveled on, like lovers do. And if sometimes we fell apart, we always came back home. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth. in every sunrise. Can't imagine life alone. Let's take the long road on together until we're gone. Want you by my side till the day I die and into the beyond. It's as simple as our love is. That's how I wanna go, all wrapped up in the arms of our extraordinary. It's nothing ordinary love. Ordinary. No, it's extraordinary.